Everyone, it's Geo coming to you from Beyond the Veil. Another morning, another cup of coffee, another vape. I'm here with my lovely wife, Mrs. Geo, who doesn't want to be on camera this morning. But we were talking about letting go of trauma and about some of the processes and progressions that we went through personally and why we tend to hold on to some of this programming that we're instilled with as children. So what prompted this video is that a friend of mine came to me for some shamanic advice, and she said, Chris, I'm uncovering all of these past memories of all of this trauma as a child, and the laws have actually opened up to a point to where I can actually do something about it, and I can go to court against this foster care system that was responsible for a lot of the trauma that I experienced. And she said, I want to come and do ayahuasca, and I want to heal. And I was thinking about this, and one of the questions that I asked her was, do you really want to heal and let go, or do you just need help dealing with the emotions and the feelings that you're having right now from all of these memories resurfacing? Because it's one thing to grieve and heal, it's another thing to detach yourself from the programs and the traumas and actually let go of everything. And the question I asked her is, are you ready to let go of everything, or are you just wanting to deal with all of these feelings and emotions? Because if you find out you have tar all over yourself, you don't go clean yourself off of the tar only to go jump into the tar pit. And I told her, if you're going to pursue legal action against this, which I wasn't advising her not to or anything like that, she needs to follow her heart first and foremost. Then the question that she needs to ask herself is she willing to deal with that for the next 5 years, 10 years, however long this process takes? And if you are engaging in a process like that, are you necessarily healing and letting go and disconnecting, or are you re-victimizing yourself? I mean, as I said a minute ago, there is a grieving process that we have to go through, but the grieving process is supposed to take us to a place of closure and a place of letting go. Now, when it comes to traumas from our childhood, the thing is, in my personal journey, I feel so disconnected from the person that I was 5 years ago, much more 10 years ago, 20 years ago. When I was a small kid, I went through a ton of trauma, so much so that when I told Sheree about it, she told me, that's not normal. That was a really, really, really bad situation you went through. But I don't even relate to that person that I was at the time, so I can't imagine, 40 years into life, all of this surfacing back up. So, I don't want to be judgmental one way or another, but I can only speak about my own journey. And that's, to me, it wouldn't make sense to jump back into the tar pit like that after so much time has elapsed. Because it just takes away, in my opinion, from the healing process and from the entire goal, which is to let go and disconnect and rise above. But I started asking myself, how is it in my own journey that I've held on to some of my programs? And what was my thought process as I was holding on to these programs? And the one that came to mind was religious programming. I grew up in the Greek Orthodox Church, and I wasn't really going every weekend, but we would go pretty regularly. And I remember from a small child, I would go in there, and it seemed boring and empty, and I really didn't feel spiritual or anything like that while I was there. And there was a lot of ritual that was standing, sitting, and half of the sermon was done in ancient Greek, or half of the ritual was done in ancient Greek, which nobody speaks ancient Greek, so it makes no sense. The Greek parts I could understand, but the ancient Greek parts I couldn't understand. So as I grew up, my mother got cancer when I was 14 for the first time. She had cancer multiple times in her life. But back then, they wanted to do this experimental hardcore chemo that she wound up without any hair. Her eyebrows fell out. She looked really, really, really bad, way worse than she was before the fact. So we went to the church, and she was just really needing some kind of assurance or some kind of hope. She was looking for hope in the church, and she went and she wanted to go pray. So I remember I'm sitting there, and I hear these Greek women, and they're speaking Greek so I can understand them. And they were my mother's associates from the church. And I remember hearing them say, "Oh my God, Look how horrible she looks. She doesn't even have any hair. Look at what she's wearing. I can't believe she's dressed like that. Why would she show up to church dressed like that? And I realized at that point, this place is fucked up and I want nothing to do with it. So then I started seeking other types of spiritualities, still within the Christian mindset. And I had several different friends that were Baptist and Mormon and, all kinds of stuff like that. And I would go to church with them every once in a while, Protestant and things like that. And my mother would get a little bit upset, like, hey, why are you going to that Baptist church? And I'm like, well, because I want to see what it's all about. And I remember sitting in one church, I don't remember the denomination, but it was the one where they speak in tongues. Which one is that?
Pentecostal.
Pentecostal. Yeah, they're Pentecostal. And they were like, oh, la, 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 la. And I was like, there's something wrong with that. And what I really noticed is that the people would get up there and they would do this speaking in tongues thing, and then they would look around to see if anybody's watching them.
Yeah, I've got my own story about that one.
Yeah, okay. So at that point, I was like, there's something seriously wrong, even with this. And I'll continue my story here in just a second. But Mrs. Geo, why don't you tell us your story on it?
Okay, well, when I was a kid, I grew up in the Pentecostal church. And we went to something called camp meeting every year, and it was because pastors from all over the state would go to this thing called camp meeting for a week to basically have Pentecost. Every single night they would do these huge services. And there was this guy called the Runner. We called him the Runner because he'd be speaking in tongues and he was screaming it and like running around in circles just in the sanctuary. Me and my sister were watching this runner one day, and he runs smack into one of the poles, and like cement poles in the middle of the sanctuary. He falls flat on his back, and then he gets up, looks around, makes sure nobody saw him, and then continues running. And that's when I realized this is such BS. I mean, this,
the churches, they use specific frequencies.
Yes, they do.
To put you in a somewhat of a trance-like state.
Right.
I remember we went to the temple. Were you there at the temple with me in Utah? No, you weren't. No, I was with some coworkers. And we went to the temple, and they have this huge organ that emits this frequency that puts people in this kind of state it's like a pseudo spiritual experience because of the different frequencies that are running through and the acoustics, the way that the churches are designed.
Even Brave New World talks about this,
really?
Where they have syntho-religious services where they will use certain frequencies, certain sound frequencies and things like that to stimulate a religious experience in the minds of the people there.
Well, we saw that with the God helmet.
Yeah.
Which is actually called the something octopus too. Somebody pointed it out.
Really?
It's the name of the creator, who I don't remember, and then octopus. Korean, something like that. Korean octopus. Not Korean, but Korean, which was the last name of the doctor that designed it. But you put the God helmet on, it changes the frequencies within the brain, the electromagnetic frequencies, and people have religious and spiritual experiences and all kinds of stuff like that. Very interesting stuff. But anyways, back to the religious stuff. So after going to a few different churches, I was like, you know what? I'm just not really finding what I'm looking for here. Maybe I should just read the Bible for guidance. And that was the turning point for me. I started reading the Bible, and I was getting through Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and all of that. And I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. Why is there slavery and oppression of women and murder babies and all this stuff? And I thought to myself, well, these must have been really bad people. And they needed different types of rules that God had given them because they were primitive, savage type of cultures, and they needed that type of control system. But then when Jesus came, everything all changed because he came. And then I got to the part to where Jesus said, well, I didn't come to replace the law or abolish the law. I came to fulfill the law. And I was like, oh, well, then that throws my theory out of the water. And then I was like, well, maybe God just, felt that we were ready for more and changed. And then I came across the Bible verse that said, I am the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, and forever. And I'm like, oh, so you were a baby slayer. And then I came to that part where Jesus was talking to the Pharisees and he's like, your father is the devil. He was a liar from the beginning and he speaks from his own resources. And I thought to myself, well, he's speaking to the Pharisees and he's telling them their father's the devil. So what exactly is he saying? That their fathers are that they are of the devil and they're not really of God? Or is he saying that Yahweh is actually the devil? And I started thinking about this stuff. And I remember I went to this one church leader guy at this like Protestant church or something like that. It was one of those denominations. And he was just like, well, there's things that we just don't understand and we can't possibly understand this stuff. God knows best. And that's the end of that. And I was like, you know what? I'm not really feeling this. But I didn't want to go to hell. And so I didn't want to renounce Christianity. I didn't want to renounce Jesus Christ, especially because you can blaspheme against God and that's fine. But if you blaspheme against the Holy Spirit, that is an unforgivable sin. So, no blasphemy against the Holy Spirit, and you better accept Jesus. Those are the two things that are the get out of jail free cards. If you go
get out of hell
free cards. Yeah. If you go to the pearly gates and they're like, well, you've done this and this. Well, hold on. Here's my get out of hell free card. Okay. I may not have believed the churches and all of that, but I did still believe in Jesus. There was always that thought in the back of my mind. I better hold on to this. But I started to realize there was a big problem with not only the churches, but also the Bible in and of itself. And then, I thought to myself, the Bible can't possibly be changed though. I was still having all this conflict within my mind. It can't possibly be changed because it's the word of God, and God, he can allow a lot of stuff to go on, but he's not going to allow his word to be changed. That was the mindset that I had. Cause I was still trying to hold on to that programming, just clutch at whatever straws I could to that religious programming that I had. And then I was watching CNN one day and there was this preacher from like Alabama or something like that. And he was talking about how he had removed all references to sex and masturbation in the Bible to make it more kid-friendly for his Sunday school. And I thought, well, shit. If some jack-off preacher in Alabama can change the Bible, damn well King James can change it. Damn well the Council of Nicaea and Constantine and all of that can change it. The Bible has, without a doubt, been manipulated from the original text, if not completely and totally fabricated and created as a system of control.
When I was a kid, I had a comic book Bible, and it was a huge Bible that was all in comic book form. Everything was in comic book form. And strangely enough, there were a lot of stories from the Bible that were just completely left missing out of that. Like
there's one at the end of Genesis. Mm-hmm. Do you remember that one?
I think you're talking about the one I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Where the guy was supposed to impregnate his brother's wife, and he instead came on the floor. Mm-hmm. They left stuff like that completely out.
Right.
Of this Bible, and yet this is supposedly the word.
And his
of God.
Brother's wife dressed up as a whore or something like that, and tricked him into having sex.
Father into having sex with her.
Right, because he thought that he was having sex with a whore. Then he left his staff, and she's like, "The person that got me pregnant owns this staff." Yeah.
No, they conveniently leave.
They always leave that out, even now to this very day. So it just goes to show the Bible has been manipulated completely. But you don't want to go to hell, so you still hold on to the whatever straws you can. So Jesus' ministry must have been completely different than what the Bible portrayed.
Yeah.
And you start looking into like Gnosticism. Mm-hmm. And Gnosticism, the mystical Jews, and et cetera, et cetera. And then you come to the point of, well, Christ came and he showed us how we all can achieve Christ consciousness in the short period of time that we're here on earth. As a matter of fact, one of our old videos, which is such a beautiful, great video about the goddess, ends with the Christ consciousness bullshit. And I look back and I'm like, oh man, we just created this really nice, beautiful cake. And we thought we were putting a nice frosting on it, and it turns out the frosting was actually shit. And but we didn't know at the time, but it's still a great video to show the goddesses and everything like that. But the point is that still trying to hold on to that programming and clutching at straws to that programming. And you made a really good point yesterday when it came to trauma, when it came to religion and things like that. People like to take on a victim identity. And whether that victim identity is past traumas, I see it on YouTube more often than not. They're survivors of child abuse, and they're survivors of this and survivors of that. And they become that trauma that they supposedly dealt with, but really they haven't really dealt with because it's still right there in their sphere. And they make this the forefront of everything that they're talking about. We try to identify ourselves. And the easiest way to identify yourself and take on an identity is a victim type of identity, whether it has to do with culture, whether it has to do with race, whether it has to do with religion. Christians are always clinging together because they're an oppressed population. They've been oppressed here, and Muslims are being oppressed, and everybody's being oppressed. Culture, race, all of that stuff. And it becomes a victim kind of mentality.
Well, it becomes a safety blanket of an identity. Whether that identity is good for you or not that's not even a question that's asked. It's simply, it could be your culture was oppressed 300, 400, 500, 1,000 years ago, and because of that, you have that identity. And that identity is so strong that people think, oh, well, I can't let go of the trauma, because if I let go of the trauma, that means I no longer have an identity, and I have to create my own identity. Right.
Trauma and programming can really be interchanged, because like truthers, for example, when we're going through the truther programming, we were truthers, and we were going to go spread the truth out there.
The media hates us. The world hates us.
Right. The world hates us. The New World Order is oppressing us. Our life sucks because of the New World Order. Has nothing to do with anything that we're doing. It's because of the New World Order. The system is designed to keep us down and to kill us. Right. And that's basically what the truther mindset is all about. The system's going to kill you. Everything is poisonous. Don't go outside. Fear your neighbors. Don't talk to anybody at all, period, because they're all brainwashed sheep. And just sit in your basement on your computer and with your guns and watch 9/11 truth videos on YouTube. And the religious programming is really deep because you're scared that you're going to go to hell. Oh, I'm going to go to hell. I'm going to go to hell. I'm going to go to hell. And that's really, in my opinion, trauma-based mind control. If you tell a small child that there is a deity in the sky that's watching everything it does, and if you do anything that's pleasurable to you, then that deity is going to send you to a torturous place for the rest of eternity. Not even the rest of your life. It's not like a life sentence where you die and then it's done. This is for the rest of eternity.
Forever and ever.
And it is the most horrible kind of torture that you can imagine. We've talked about the pizza stuff and the Epstein stuff. This is 1,000,000 times worse than the Epstein stuff and the pizza stuff. What supposedly hell is like come into the sphere as well, because you go around and you have that fear program instilled in you from religion, and then that religious programming now becomes a conduit for all other type of programming. And then we wind up with, in the most extreme cases, places like Saudi Arabia, where they're taking gay couples and crucifying them literally in the streets. In Dubai, for example, we were just talking with a couple of our friends yesterday. If a woman is raped in Dubai, then she is guilty of having sexual relations outside of marriage. So she is punished as well, as is the rapist too. This is the Christian, this is the Judeo-Christian Islamic programming at work here. It's the Mosaic law. I mean, really, Islam is nothing more than a retelling of Judaism and Christianity kind of merged together with Muhammad as the main prophet. But if you look in the Quran, it's all the exact same stories from the Bible, just retelling. As a matter of fact, it all comes from the God of Abraham. Abraham had two sons. He had Isaac and he had Ishmael. And the Christians believe that it's Isaac's bloodline that led to Jesus. And the Muslims believe that it was Ishmael's bloodline that they follow. And in Islam, Ishmael was taken up to the mountain to be sacrificed by Abraham, whereas in Judaism and Christianity, it was Isaac that was taken up to the mountain. But at the end of the day, it's all based around a man who was willing to murder his child. Think about that. Every mainstream religion, the big three, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all originate from a man that was willing to murder his child without question. And it's all the God of Abraham. So when I hear people arguing about Yahweh versus Allah, it's like, well, it's all the God of Abraham. It's the same God. There's one God that Abraham worshipped. These two branched off in different ways, but still it leads back to the exact same God. The same one that demanded blood sacrifices, the same one that murdered babies, killed babies indiscriminately, and the same one that gave rules for how to beat your slave within an inch of their lives, who gave rules on how to sell your daughter into sex slavery. This is the God that is at the top of these religions. So this fear programming gets down into the heart space, which is why they say you must let Jesus into your heart. You must let Allah into your heart. You must let God into your heart. And whether you argue about the pronunciation of Yahweh or Yahuwah or Yahuwah and Yashahwah and, all the different ways that they say it, it's all the exact same virus, the exact same beast, which is the demiurge, or which is Allah, or which is the God of Abraham. It all links back to that. You have a story that you were sharing with me yesterday about a pastor that was giving a sermon about murdering his child.
Yeah, when I was about 10, somewhere between 10 and 13 years old, I was sitting in church one day, and one of the pastors was up there. I don't remember if it was my grandfather that was preaching that day, if it was the assistant pastor, but it doesn't really matter because what they were saying, my family completely just agreed with. It seemed like everybody in the audience was just agreeing with this. He said that it would be very hard, but if God demanded that he sacrifice his child, he would. And I was floored by that. And I went to bed that night scared to death that at some point God was going to ask my grandparents to kill me, and they would have to. Like, there wouldn't even be a question about it. There wouldn't even be a parental instinct that says, no, I'm not going to kill my own kid. Are you crazy? And that's at that point I stopped being a believer to the point where I would do everything I could to avoid actually being in church.
Do you know why? It was why Abraham went with no question. Because child sacrifice was common back then.
It was more than common.
It's actually in the 10 Commandments. A lot of people don't realize this, but Exodus 20 is not the 10 Commandments. Exodus 20 is just like a list of suggestions. They call it the 10 Commandments, don't get me wrong. But Moses went up supposedly to the mountain, came back with stone tablets. When he came back with those stone tablets that supposedly said, "Thou shalt not kill" on them, he threw the tablets down, broke them when they saw the Canaanites worshiping a golden calf, who it could be symbolic of Hathor, for example. And so...
Well, they wanted to go back to Egypt. They wanted to go back to the ways of the Egyptians.
Right.
Because they missed it.
So the golden calf represents Hathor, which represents mother, which represents she's represented as a calf because that's where milk comes from.
Right.
Life comes from there. So he ordered all the Canaanites to be slaughtered. Mm-hmm. So then a little bit later in Exodus 20, it talks about a list of supposed commandments. But then when you go to Exodus 34, there's a chapter called the Stone Tablets. And at that point, Moses goes up to the mountain again for 40 days, and he starts carving in the 10 Commandments, which were written on the stones that he initially dropped. And that's in Exodus 34. And it even says in Exodus 34, "This shall be called the 10 Commandments." But that's not the ones that we want to put up on courthouses. That's not the ones that we want to put up in churches. I mean, most Christians don't even know what the 10 Commandments are from Exodus 20, much less even know the existence of the 10 Commandments in Exodus 34. In Exodus 34, it says, "All of your firstborn are mine." Sacrifice all of your firstborn to me. You can redeem your firstborn son by sacrificing a goat or something in its place. Other commandments are use unleavened bread during the sacrifices, because what they would do is they would have these big sacrifices with the blood running all over the altar, and then they would dip the flatbread into the blood and eat it. So he's saying, don't dip yeast into the blood before eating it. Dip flatbread into the blood before eating it.
Is that where it also says don't bathe? Don't
boil a kid in its mother's milk.
No,
yeah, a kid, meaning a baby goat.
Yeah.
It also says clean up the sacrifice. Don't let it fester overnight, because you don't want flesh and blood and everything like that festering overnight on the sacrificial altar. And they would have these big sacrifices with blood literally running down the temple walls. Running down the temple walls. And dogs would come and eat and drink and lick the blood up off the ground. This was common practice back then. This is the God of Abraham that we're clinging on to so badly and saying, no, I just want to hold on to this. I want to hold on to this. Oh, well, I at least want to hold on to Gnosticism. Oh, well, at least don't tell me that the Christ consciousness thing is all. But the thing is, can you have a little bit of cancer? Can you have just a tiny bit? You're like, well, I want to relieve myself of this cancer, but I still want to hold on to just a tiny bit, because a tiny bit of cancer makes me feel a little bit better about myself. Just in case I need the cancer. The thing is that cancer is going to stay inside of you, and it's going to continue to grow, and it's continue to fester. Which brings me all the way back to the conversation I was having with my friend. Mm-hmm. Are you really ready to let it go? If you're really ready to let it go, I will take you beyond the veil, and I will show you how to let it go. But you can't hold on to it a little bit, because all of our efforts are going to be in vain, and all of your efforts are going to be in vain. And that's a question that you really have to ask yourself, ladies and gentlemen. When you deal with your traumas and all of this, are you really wanting to let them go? Because letting them go also means letting go of all of the negative feelings, all of the feelings for wanting vengeance against people that have wronged you. All of those feelings all encompassed like that. You don't go and drink ayahuasca and say, okay, well, I want to deal with this trauma. Then after you drink ayahuasca, you say, okay, now I'm going to go kill the person that caused the trauma. You could do that, but it's not going to be the healing process. It's not going to be the process of letting go of the trauma. Letting go of the trauma means letting go of the trauma. Disconnecting from it and then viewing it from a third person perspective at that point. I went through some shit. When I told you about it, you were like, that's not normal. But I don't sit there and go, I hate my father for this, and I hate this, and I hate that. I just think to myself, I don't even recognize that kid that was being beaten like that. I don't recognize him. He's foreign to me. It's so far removed from who I am right now. But I have had the benefit of going through the Aya process over the last 10 years. But I can tell you this. In the Aya process, I never felt like I needed to confront all of this. Okay, I'll just put it out there. My dad used to choke me until I would pass out. I thought it was normal. And Sheree's like, no, that is not normal. There's something really fucked up going on there. And I never had to go through that process of, oh my God, I feel like such a victim and I feel this, that. I went through it and I realized, I have a short temper because I watched my father have a short temper, because I watched how he would blow up on me. So in order for me to cut off certain behavioral patterns, I need to cut myself off from that experience and from that trauma. And boom, I did. And there was a sense of calmness that came over me. But there wasn't a sense of, well, I have to go experience it and I have to talk to it like a victim and et cetera, et cetera. It was just, I needed to understand how it was affecting me now, not how it affected me then. Because if I go backwards to try to examine how it affected me then, well, then I'm just going backwards and I'm going back to that place. That place is way far behind me. I need to know how I'm tethered to it right here and right now, and I need to be able to break that tether. That, in my opinion, is the point of the healing process and the point of the ayahuasca healing, more importantly.
Well, that brings into question the entire industry of counseling that's in effect right now, because the whole industry of counseling, they're in general agreement that that's the opposite of how you should be doing it. You should be going back to your inner child of who you were when that first happened, and then
I could be wrong.
Confront the situation. No, I'm
well,
saying
no,
you're
I'm saying I
right.
could be wrong, and I don't want anybody to think that I'm telling them one way's better than the other. I'm just sharing my personal journey with it.
Well, I think they're trying to re-traumatize people.
Exactly,
all over again.
exactly.
That's
It's a
what I'm saying.
re-traumatization over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And you don't heal by re-traumatizing yourself. You don't heal a burn by going and re-burning yourself. You heal a burn by understanding, all right, well, the fire did this to me, so now I need to go find some aloe vera. Not, I'm going to go stick my hand back in the fire again so I can re-experience that, so I can really understand what it felt like to be burned and why I burned myself to begin with. No, go get some freaking aloe vera and go. The further you get away from the period of time that you were burned, the more it's going to heal. But if you keep on going back to the fire over and over and over again, it's not going to. You can go back and you can look at the fire and go, okay, well, I understand fire now. I understand that it burns. I understand what I did in order to burn myself, but you don't have to go continuously stick your hand in the fire. I feel like a lot of people are conditioned to do that, and it's sad. Mm-hmm. But again, if that's what you're called to do, that's what you're called to do. If that's what's in your heart, that's what's in your heart. And I'm not trying to change anybody's mind or anybody's heart at all, period. All I'm trying to do is just get people to think about other perspectives and other ways to handle this. And ultimately, shine the light on a path where you too can forge yourself into a sword. And you too can disconnect from all of the traumas and everything like that and become something new, not dwell on the old,
Create your own identity based on what you want to be, rather than what you were traumatized to be, or what, your trauma has resulted in you being. That's not your identity. That's society's identity. That's cultural identity. That's the victim identity.
It's a good point. I think you just hit on something. One of our listeners left a comment and they said, I was miserable because I was trying to love everybody and I was trying to make everybody happy. You know what? Now I take that back. All the anxiety and depression for absolute no reason. It's because those people feel like they can't be who they really are. And they're trying to be what everybody else is telling them, what their family's telling them, what their people around them are telling them, and all of that, instead of taking on their own identity, and they're miserable doing it.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a deeper reason for it, though.
Yeah. No, there is, because I remember before I met you, and before I, got on the forum that we met on, before 2008, I was miserable. I was depressed. I was sad all the time. And I realize now it's because I was trying to live a life that was not mine.
Right.
That didn't belong to me. That, I wasn't doing anything to make myself happy whatsoever. There was nothing about my life that was special or unique, or, I wasn't following my bliss. I didn't even know what my bliss was. And then it's just suddenly the world opened up to me, and the depression stopped, the anxiety stopped, and I started living life with my own identity. And once that happened, it's just a whole new leaf turned over for me, and life started to become magical. It started to become wonderful. It started to, open up new possibilities that I had never even considered before. And now look at us.
Yeah, I think the biggest form of depression and anxiety is indeed people not living as who they are, and being forced to live as something else, and holding on to all these bullshit identities that have been assigned to them by somebody else. I mean,
Right.
You talk about trauma. That trauma has been assigned to you by somebody else, not anything you did.
Right.
Especially if you're a child and you go through the trauma, somebody else did that to you. So why are you going to let them continually victimize you for the rest of their lives? Control you, control your emotions, control who you are, control your reactions, control all of this. This is what I talk about when I talk about getting down to the raw consciousness, the raw unprogrammed consciousness, and deprogramming from all of this. Because if you're taking on that victim mentality, if you're taking on that religious programming, if you're taking on that cultural programming, well, then you're not operating from the raw consciousness, but rather you're reacting to everything in the matrix from your programming or from your trauma programming. Where I say, take the power back. Take the power back for yourself. Stop reacting from your programming and instead come into the matrix, navigate the matrix, act within the matrix rather than react. Acting is calculated. Reaction is
automatic.
Automatic. It's like a reflex. To react is a reflex. Acting is calculated and strategic. Become the programmer of